All right, so here's how the sun actually works as far as where it's at in the sky, how high it is, and how you measure such things. Look, the latitude lines demark the angle of the sun. So if you're at the equator, the sun is right over your head on the equinoxes, right? In March and September or whatever. On the equinoxes, the sun is directly over the equator. And at noon, right? Well, at noon on the equinox, if you're at the 45th degree latitude, north or south, then the sun's going to be at a 45-degree angle to the horizon, right? And that's why it's called the 45th degree. That's literally, the latitude lines are named after the angle of the sun. And whether you're in the north or the south latitude, if you're at 10 degrees north or south latitude, the sun will be 10 degrees at a 10-degree angle to the horizon, right? And if you're at 90 degrees north or south, which is the poles, the sun will be on the horizon, which means it's at the point when the triangle between the equator, the sun, and the North Pole, that triangle, the distance from the North Pole to the sun and the distance from the North Pole to the equator are basically the same. If you understand how triangle math works, and I'll explain it to you now. Look, you can't argue with triangle math, Pythagorean or trigonometry, right? So an equilateral triangle, which is one that has the x side of it and the y side of it form a 90-degree angle. Those angles, the other two angles, if the other two angles are 45 degrees, that's called the equilateral triangle. And then with an equilateral triangle, both legs are the same distance. Okay? That means that if you're standing at the 45th degree, the sun's at a 45-degree angle. On the equinox, you know the sun is directly over the equator, so you cannot argue the fact that the distance from the 45th degree to the equator is the same as the distance from the equator to the sun, because they formed an equilateral triangle. And if you wanted to argue it, you couldn't, because it happens at the same time from the southern 45th degree. So there's two equilateral triangles that prove that the sun is directly over the equator on the equinox at high noon. And the fact that degrees of latitude are 69 miles apart closes the case on how high the sun is above the equator on the equinox. 69 times 45 is 3,005. The sun is 3,005 miles above the equator, and you can figure out the size of the sun real quick from there, because the sun is a half a degree. Like there's 360 degrees in a circle. The sun takes up half a degree. So there's 720, there's room for 720 suns as it circles the path that it takes. So if the sun is 93 million miles away, for it to be half a degree wide, it has to be astronomical in size. But if the sun is only 3,100 miles above the equator and it's a half a degree wide, then it can't be much wider than a degree is on land, which is fucking 69 miles. So a 30 34.5 miles is how wide a half a degree is at the equator. A degree of longitude, right? Degrees of longitude, they don't have any distance at the North Pole, but they're like a pizza slice. They get further and further apart as they head towards the equator, and then they keep getting further apart. They don't get smaller again towards the South Pole because Earth is flat and it's not a planet. So we don't live on a planet. Earth is not a planet. And the sun is 3,100 miles above sea level, right? Okay, you cannot argue that. You can't fucking argue that. And I've had people on actual mathematicians on YouTube try to fucking insult me and argue that. Do you not know how to fucking tell how high something is and the distance away? Look, if you're standing at a building and it's a skyscraper and you walk 45 feet away and look up at it and it's at a 45-degree angle, the skyscraper is only 45 feet tall. It's not a skyscraper. It's a fucking 3-story house. But if it's 45,000 feet high and it's at a 45-degree angle, that'll be because you walked 45,000 feet. Because the equilateral triangle is the same distance on the x and the y axis. It's a 45-degree angle on the hypotenuse. You cannot argue that, you know. And you can do the math. It doesn't matter where you're at because it just changes. If you're at the 75th degree, and then it's just easier. It's always easier to do a 45-degree angle because that's a sweet spot where the distance is the same height as across the plane. All right, so that's a game ender of anything that you'll find. If you look up how to measure the sun, like in the movie, if you're making movies and you want to know where the sun is going to rise, how high it's going to be, you know what I mean? There's an actual ephemeris for this fucking shit, and it is completely precise. You can't argue with it because you can't say, like, you could say, oh, it only looks like it's at a 45-degree angle because the sun is actually way bigger than that and it's a million miles away. It's 93 million miles away. No, because you can look at that from both sides, the South Pole or the North Pole, the 45th degree north latitude or the 45th degree south latitude. And so what that means is when you're standing at the North Pole on the equinox, and at high noon, the sun is laying on the horizon, then you've formed a triangle that, for all intents and purposes, it doesn't have much cosine on it because the distance from the North Pole to the equator is 62,010 miles, right? And that's going to be, half of that is going to be how high the sun is off the equator. Because if you're at the South Pole right then, 6,200 miles away, then the sun will be fucking laying on the equator there too, on the horizon, which will prove that the sun is dead in the center between the North and South poles on the equinox at high noon. So right then you'll realize, well, it's flat. So the distance from the North Pole to the South Pole, which is 69 times 180, right? 90 degrees to the equator, and then another 90 to the South Pole, the outer perimeter. And then you'll figure out that it's 6210 times 2, right? 6420. 6420 is the radius from the North Pole from 90 degrees north to 90 degrees south. So 180 times 69. And when you punch that in and find out, well, if the radius, what's the circumference? Then you'll find out that the distance around Antarctica at 90 degrees at the South Pole is 78,100 miles. A circle, not a single point on the bottom of a globe, a circle outside the ice walls that is inside of it is all of the oceans with the fucking continents in the center of that, and the North Pole right below Polaris, right below the celestial, it's not a heliocentrism, it's polar centrism. The Polaris is the center of the spinning wheel in the sky, right? But even still, the North Star, by the same reckoning, when the North Star is 45 degrees at an angle on the equinox, you'll see that you're standing at the 45 degree latitude, north latitude. And then it'll hit you that, dude, when the North Star is flat on the horizon because you're standing at the equator, that means that's because it's, for all intents and purposes, the same distance away from you as the fucking North Pole. Right? So the North Star is only 3,105 miles above the fucking North Pole. Do the fucking math. You can't. If you can't do math, then you ain't shit. I mean, so it doesn't matter if you're Einstein or not, because if you roll back Einstein didn't. It didn't matter what these fools said, because when the one guy, Galileo, when they told him, look, we're gonna say that we're living on a globe and it spins, that it's revolving around the sun. And Galileo said, well, you're gonna have to make the fucking stars really, really far away because they don't move. There's no parallax. And so that's when they came out right then. They're like, all right, well, the stars are going to have to be fucking gigantic because they're going to have to be so far away that they never move, except the wandering stars, the planets, of which Earth is not one. So it's complete horse shit. You know what I mean? The sun changes heights. The sun circles tighter, like it circles in the summer, it circles over the Tropic of Cancer, and then in the fall and spring it circles the equator, and then in the winter it circles the Tropic of Capricorn. But it always goes the same speed. So when it's further south, making a bigger circle, it's fucking going faster, right? Because it still has to make a loop every 24 hours. You know what I mean? You can't fuck this up. It's got to be connected to something for that to happen. You know what I mean? For it to swing around, and the wider the radius, the faster the track it's on. That means it's fucking attached to something. And just like the moon doesn't change its face. Yeah, right, because it's fucking attached. These are lights in the sky, Anyway, I don't know about all that, but that's the breakdown on how a 45-degree angle at the equinoxes determines the height of the sun over the equator.